Hello, my name is Elma. I'm 32 years old, and if someone had told me 10 years ago that one day I'd be living alone in my own 4-bedroom house, tailored to my needs and filled with technology one helped develop myself, I probably would have chuckled and thought it was too beautiful a fantasy for a girl who wrote her first lines of code in a stifling dorm room, where instead of silence there was only the hum of an old fan and the loud chatter of neighbors through thin partitions. And yet, years later, all the hard work as a programmer, the long nights in front of a monitor, the millions of lines of code, the endless revisions, the mistakes, and the victories, it all paid off, 3 years ago, without help from my parents, without loans, or outside investments. I bought my own house. A beautiful house, spacious and full of light, with a neat green lawn in front of the porch and a living hedge shielding the backyard from prying eyes. A true oasis for someone who prefers peace and order over the chaos of the city. But before we continue, leave a comment telling us what city you're watching this video from. Enjoy! I work at a company that specializes in developing smart home systems, surveillance cameras, sensors, security modules, and software for remote control of all these devices. The most interesting and, perhaps, most gratifying part of my job is that I've actually developed the majority of the software myself, from the interface to the internal logic, because, as it turns out, I'm trusted, valued, and allowed to be not just an executor, but the creator of solutions. My boss loves to say I'm his golden find: disciplined, independent, responsible, capable of working remotely without losing productivity and, frankly, delivering results that sometimes exceed expectations. Thanks to a stable and well-paying job, I was not only able to buy a house but also set it up exactly how I wanted. I turned one of the spare rooms into my dream office, with huge windows letting in floods of light, stylish furniture, a powerful computer, and, of course, perfect silence. My daily routine has become almost ritualistic. I wake up at exactly 8 in the morning, drink strong coffee with a splash of vanilla syrup, sit down at my laptop, and dive into work, not leaving the house until evening. At 6, I shut everything down, sometimes order food, put on my favorite Netflix series, and simply relax. On weekends I clean, do grocery shopping, and allow myself a little laziness. No unnecessary emotions, no drama, just me, technology, and peace. And yes, I've wisely installed a full security system in and around the house from our company. Cameras in every room and in the yard, motion sensors on every entrance, all connected to my phone and laptop, including special software I wrote myself to have access to live feeds from anywhere in the world. It's very convenient, though I haven't told anyone about it, especially not my family. I don't want them to think I'm paranoid. Life moved along in a steady, predictable rhythm, until one phone call changed everything. It was from Sarah, my older sister, 35 years old, mother of 2 boys, 9-year-old Leon and 7-year-old Mateo. 2 years ago, her husband, a dim but charming man, ran off with a waitress the moment she turned 22. And since then there's been neither alimony nor word from him. He vanished like smoke, leaving Sarah alone with debts, a job, and raising 2 kids. I tried to help by covering part of her rent because, despite my tendency towards solitude, I love my family, especially my nephews, who, although sometimes noisy, are still bright and kind-hearted children. "Elma, I need to talk to you," she said on the phone, and her voice sounded unusually cautious, too soft, as if she were carefully choosing each word, afraid I'd say no before even hearing the request. "Would it be okay if we visited you this Saturday?" The boys really missed their aunt. I laughed and immediately agreed. Of course they could come. I missed them just as much, and the thought of spending a weekend with my beloved nephews even seemed delightful. I cleaned the house, bought groceries, prepared fruit snacks they love, and was just making sandwiches when I heard Sarah's car pull up outside. I stepped onto the porch to greet them, smiling broadly, almost with childlike excitement, but the sight that met me made my smile freeze. Sarah wasn't unloading overnight bags from the trunk, she was pulling out full-sized suitcases. Heavy, bulky ones, the kind people don't bring for a weekend visit, but for a move. Leon and Mateo rushed over, hugged me joyfully, bombarded me with questions and stories, and then Mateo said proudly, "Aunt Elma, we brought all our stuff." A knot of unease twisted in my stomach. "All your stuff?" I repeated with a strained smile, watching Sarah walk toward my front door with another bag in hand. "Boys, help me with the boxes," she commanded, like she owned the place. I followed them inside, feeling my heart beat faster with each step. Sarah was moving around my living room like she'd lived there forever, directing the kids where to put boxes, opening one and pulling out their things. "Sarah, what's going on? This isn't just a weekend visit, is it?" I finally managed to ask. She straightened up and looked at me with that firm, almost commanding expression I remembered from childhood, when Sarah, older and always so sure of herself, would take charge whether asked or not, leaving me, the younger one, with no choice but to follow along. Her gaze made it clear, she wanted something, not just attention, not just hospitality, not help for a day or two, but something bigger, more permanent, almost irreversible. "I moved out of the apartment," she said calmly, as if announcing she'd bought a new dress or changed her hairstyle. "We're going to live here with you." I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. She, meanwhile, kept going, almost casually, as though this had all been settled long ago. "You've got 3 empty bedrooms. The boys need stability, and I need help. You work from home anyway, so you'll be able to look after them while I'm busy." I could feel a wave of protest rising inside me, hot, breath-stealing, and though my voice remained controlled, I was boiling on the inside. "No. Absolutely not. I'll help you find a new apartment. I'll even pay rent for a couple of months if needed, but you can't just move in here without my permission." Sarah's face took on a stubborn, almost defiant expression, and without saying a word, she pulled out her phone, quickly scrolled through her contacts, found the number she needed, and hit call. "Hi, Mom. It's Sarah. Yes, we're here in New York, just like we agreed." "Yes, she's being difficult." "Talk to her," she said and, without giving me time to react, thrust the phone into my hand. I had no choice but to take it, like a baton passed unexpectedly and unwillingly in a relay race. "Elma, sweetheart, what's wrong?" came my mother's voice through the receiver, soft, caring, concerned, as if she already knew I was about to resist and was prepared to talk me down. "Mom, did you know Sarah was planning to move into my house?" I asked, trying to suppress my growing irritation. "Of course, darling. We talked about it last week. Sarah needs help, and you have so much space. You should be happy to help your sister and those poor children," she replied, and every word carried a subtle reproach, as if I'd already done something wrong before I even had a chance to speak. "But, Mom, I never agreed to this. I need space to work, and I can't just take care of 2 kids, I tried to explain, hoping for understanding, but what I heard instead was, "Elma Elizabeth, I'm very disappointed in you. Your sister is going through a hard time, and family supports each other. Those children need stability, and you're being selfish." The weight of guilt hit me like a truck rounding a corner. I gripped the phone tighter, looked at Leon and Mateo, who stood at the foot of the stairs holding their breath, wide-eyed with anxious expectation, and felt horrible. I silently handed the phone back to Sarah, feeling defeated, drained, and, worst of all, unfair. "See? It's settled," Sarah said, her smile triumphant yet gentle, almost tender, like the smile of someone who had won but didn't want to humiliate the loser. "Don't worry, Elma. We'll stay just a few months. Until I find a better job and can afford a nicer place. Maybe even hire a nanny for the boys." I looked at her skeptically, fully aware that there would be no nanny and this was not going to be a few months, but something far more lasting. But what could I do? The kids were already here, with their things, their boxes, their toys, and school backpacks, and my parents were clearly on Sarah's side. "All right," I finally said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "But we need to establish a few basic rules." "Absolutely," she nodded quickly. "We won't get in your way. I promise." I nodded back, but even then, at that very moment, deep down I knew that promise wouldn't be kept. And yet, despite my fears, the first few weeks turned out to be not so bad after all. Sarah really did try to keep her word. She got up early, got the kids ready, left for her retail job, and then picked them up from school around 3 and came home to cook dinner. I could hear them laughing in the kitchen, the rustling of grocery bags, the kids arguing over video games, all while I sat in my office writing code. But it was background noise, soft, lively, almost homey. Leon and Mateo, to my surprise, showed admirable awareness. They understood that Aunt Elma needed space and quiet, and though they sometimes knocked on my door to show me a drawing, a homework assignment, or ask a math question, they did so gently, with that rare kind of respect children only show when they're truly loved and not just managed. And I have to admit, in those moments, my heart warmed. I was reminded how touching children can be when they're not raised with shouting but simply with care. Sarah behaved like a decent guest. She did her own laundry, cleaned her room, and even occasionally helped with shopping without asking for a dime. When my parents came over for dinner one Sunday evening, everything felt almost idyllic. Dad patted me on the shoulder with pride and said, "Elma, you're such a good sister," and Mom, watching Leon and Mateo play video games in the living room, added softly, "The boys looked happy here. They needed this stability." Sarah smiled at me across the table, sincerely, without a trace of irony. "Elma's been amazing. I don't know what we would have done without her." And, I'll admit, in that moment, I truly felt good. Honestly, this temporary arrangement might have actually worked, if things had stayed the way they were in those first weeks. Sarah seemed motivated, if a little tired, but she was actively searching for a better-paying job. The boys were well-behaved, even a bit shy, as if they were afraid that being too loud would upset the fragile balance, and I, despite the new responsibilities, was still able to focus on work, meet deadlines, attend online meetings, and even enjoy an evening or two without the computer. However, after 2 months, subtle shifts began accumulating, at first barely noticeable, like dust settling on a shelf you don't see until you brush your hand across it, and then, all at once, the whole house feels covered in it. It started small. Sarah began saying she needed to stay late at work. And while I had no reason not to believe her, it all started sounding a bit too convenient, too predictable. One Tuesday morning, as she slung her bag over her shoulder and adjusted her hair in the hallway mirror, she casually tossed over her shoulder, "Elma, I'll be working more hours. My manager said if I show commitment, there might be a promotion." "That's great," I replied absent-mindedly, not looking up from my laptop as I launched a test for the next module of a mobile app. "More money, right?" "Exactly. But I won't be able to pick the boys up from school anymore." "Could you get them?" "Just until I figure something out." I froze mid-sentence, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, and felt the irritation rise from my chest to my throat. "Sarah, I sometimes have meetings in the afternoon. I can't just drop everything and drive to school. Please, it's temporary. Once I get the promotion, I'll be able to afford a nanny." Her voice was quiet, almost pleading, and knowing how this usually went, I gave in. So I began picking the children up. At first, there was nothing particularly terrible about it. I rearranged my schedule so I could finish work by 2:30, drove across the neighborhood to the elementary school, stood in the ridiculous, winding line of cars filled with equally exhausted parents, sat there bored while the radio murmured in the background, and then, finally, once the tired but lively boys climbed into the car, I drove them home. They would lay out their notebooks and textbooks on the kitchen table, argue about fractions, ask questions about geography, and I, with one earbud in and one eye on the screen, tried to squeeze in a few more hours of work. But even that turned out not to be enough. Gradually, dinner became my responsibility too. At first I just helped, then I cooked in turns with Sarah, and eventually it all fell on me. Sarah began coming home later and later, citing inventory, new shifts, training new employees, or helping out colleagues who supposedly lacked experience. She would show up around 8, sometimes even 9 in the evening, sometimes cheerful, sometimes visibly exhausted, but always later than promised. She'd eat whatever was left of the dinner I had made for the boys, toss her empty plate in the sink, and retreat to her room without even saying thank you. Weekends became a real ordeal. On Saturday mornings she would disappear, mumbling something about errands, meetings, work, and not return until late Sunday evening, leaving me alone with 2 restless, energetic boys who wanted to go to the park, ride their bikes, see a movie, or at least play bowling. Instead of using my weekends as I once had, to recharge, work on personal projects, or simply rest, I became a full-time aunt. I took them to museums, did crafts with them, read bedtime stories, helped them solve math problems, trying my best to be kind and patient, but increasingly I could feel exhaustion eating away at me from the inside, irritation and helplessness burning the joy out of every new morning. One weekday evening, when I could no longer hold it in, I decided to wait for Sarah and talk. I needed to hear the truth, at least her version of it, even if it was unpleasant. I settled in the living room, turned off the lights so the room was wrapped in a gentle twilight, and sat there, listening to every sound. Time dragged on. 9, 10, 11. I was starting to get genuinely angry, but I stubbornly stayed put. The boys had long since fallen asleep, curled up under their blankets hugging stuffed bears, and the house filled with that special kind of nighttime silence, when even the fridge hums more quietly than usual. Finally, around midnight, I heard the familiar sound of an engine. Sarah's car pulled up, headlights slicing through the darkness to illuminate the bushes by the fence, and a few moments later the door slammed. She stumbled into the hallway, leaning against the wall with unsteady steps, and I knew immediately she was drunk. Not tipsy, but really drunk, flushed cheeks, unfocused gaze, and she reeked of some unfamiliar cologne, sickly sweet and heavy, like proof that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, and she jumped, not expecting to find me sitting in the darkened living room. "Elma, what are you doing here?" she mumbled, still not fully realizing she was about to be confronted. "Waiting for you. I want to know what's really going on. Are you actually working all these extra hours, or are you just out drinking with men?" My patience snapped. The words came out sharp, almost cutting. Her expression changed. The fake politeness vanished, replaced by another side of Sarah I hadn't seen in years, prickly, irritable, contemptuous of weakness. "I'm trying to have a personal life, all right? I'm allowed to date. I've been divorced for 2 years. But you're lying to me. You say you're working, and then you come home drunk, leaving your kids with me. Believe what you want, Elma. I don't owe you any explanations," she snapped, and trudged upstairs, not waiting for a response, a judgment, or a word more. After that, everything got worse. Sarah started coming home in the middle of the night, barely able to stand, with smeared lipstick and a vacant look in her eyes, and she barely saw her children at all. She didn't ask them questions, didn't check their notebooks, didn't kiss them goodnight. I did everything: picked them up, helped with homework, cooked, cleaned, read bedtime stories, listened to their complaints, and soothed their little heartbreaks. She wasn't caring for her children at all and seemed almost absent from their lives, as if she physically inhabited the house but mentally lived elsewhere, in her own private world where there was no room for Mateo, Leon, and certainly not for me. I filled the space she left behind, picked them up from school, helped with their homework, made their lunches and dinners, reminded them to brush their teeth, read them bedtime stories, took them to the park or their weekend classes, trying to be their support system, while knowing full well that nothing could replace a mother's love, the real, focused attention they craved so desperately. The turning point came unexpectedly, when Leon's teacher called and invited me to a parent-teacher meeting, explaining that his math grades had begun to decline rapidly. "Ms. Milani wants to meet about Leon," I told Sarah the next morning while standing by the coffee machine. "Can't you go?" she muttered without even looking up from her phone. "I'm busy that day." "Sarah, I'm not his parent. This is your responsibility. You should be going to these things. Elma, please. You're better at school stuff anyway. You help him with homework more than I do." So I went. I sat on a wooden chair in a stuffy classroom among other parents, pretending to be his guardian, while Mrs. Chin, a slim woman with sharp, observant eyes, shared her concerns about Leon's withdrawn behavior and his sudden lack of interest in the subject. It was humiliating, painful, and above all, wrong. That evening, overwhelmed with frustration, I called my mother. "Mom, Sarah isn't taking care of her kids. I'm doing everything while she goes out drinking and dating men. This isn't what we agreed to." There was a long silence on the other end before her voice came through, warm but distant. "Elma, your sister is just trying to rebuild her life. She needs time. The divorce was hard on her. Mom, she gets drunk almost every night, and I'm the one raising her kids. I didn't sign up for this." My voice was shaking. "You're exaggerating, sweetheart. Sarah deserves a little happiness. Just be patient with her. I hung up the phone, feeling a heavy, crushing sense of loneliness settle in my chest, because even my own mother had taken Sarah's side, excusing all of her irresponsible behavior, as if I were a stranger in this equation, a temporary caretaker no one had asked, but everyone expected. The boys had started to notice too. One morning at breakfast, Mateo quietly asked, "Aunt Elma, why isn't Mom home anymore?" And I had no idea what to say, because how do you explain to a 7-year-old that his mother chose parties over him? Leon was growing quieter, more withdrawn, lost in his own thoughts. He didn't complain, but his eyes spoke louder than words ever could. They needed their mother, present, loving, involved, supportive, not the fleeting shadow of a woman who passed through the doorway only to disappear again into the noise. Things kept getting worse. Sarah showed up less and less, and when she was home, she acted like she was the one in charge and I was just a lingering guest who'd overstayed her welcome. She ate the food I bought, left her dirty dishes in the sink as if it was just expected, without a second thought about who would clean up or how aggravating that might be. The boys lived as if they didn't have a mother at all. But the hardest part was watching them try to reach her, bringing her drawings, begging her to come watch them ride their bikes, excitedly telling her how their day had gone, only for her to wave them off or pretend to listen while her eyes stayed glued to her phone, lost in another flirtatious conversation. I saw that pain reflected in Leon's gaze and heard the weary sighs from Mateo when she broke yet another promise and forgot. One afternoon, I was in my office configuring a new test environment when I suddenly heard a loud crash downstairs, the kind of sound that instantly grips your heart because something about it felt wrong, like not just an object had shattered, but the piece itself. I jumped up and ran down the stairs. In the living room, Mateo was standing near the coffee table, shards of my blue antique glass vase, the one I had brought back from a trip to Prague, scattered across the floor. He was crying, clutching his leg, blood already seeping through the fabric of his pants. "What happened?" I asked, dropping to my knees beside him. "We were playing tag," Leon said softly from nearby, his face pale and full of guilt. Mateo ran and hit the table. The vase fell on his leg. I gently pulled up the fabric and saw a deep, clean cut, clearly serious. "All right, boys, we need to get Mateo to the hospital right now," I said, forcing calm into my voice. I grabbed a towel, carefully wrapped the wound without touching the injured area, helped Mateo into the car, and Leon climbed in the back, pressed against the door, looking scared and ashamed. The emergency room was chaos. Mateo was crying from pain and fear. Leon was silent, but I could see his fists clenched on his knees, and I wanted to hold them both and tell them everything would be all right, even if I didn't quite believe it myself. I tried to fill out the forms, explaining that I wasn't their mother but their aunt, and when the nurse asked where their mother was, I lied, "She's at work." I had to make up a phone number, a workplace. Everything felt endless. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they were taken in to be seen. The doctor said the cut was deep but not critical. They cleaned the wound, stitched it up, dressed it, and gave aftercare instructions. I held Mateo's hand while he lay on the exam table and felt something heavy, inevitable, and important slowly building inside me. We got home around 6 in the evening, and although it wasn't yet fully dark outside, the house felt steeped in a heavy silence, as if the very air had absorbed the stress of the day. I was emotionally and physically exhausted, and the boys sat quietly, barely speaking, their eyes still full of the fear and tension they had just endured. I made them grilled cheese sandwiches, placed them on warm plates, and turned on an old cartoon, hoping the familiar story, the bright colors, and the comforting food might help them relax and forget, even if just for a little while. I watched them from a corner of the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, still not fully grasping how fragile this thread was, the one that held together our temporary family life. Sarah came home earlier than usual, around 8 in the evening, and the moment she walked in, her eyes landed on Mateo's bandaged leg. "What the hell happened to him?" she demanded, loud, harsh, with an edge that sounded more like a cop on interrogation than a mother returning to her children. I explained everything, that it had been an accident, that the vase had fallen, that I took them to the hospital and Mateo needed stitches. I expected concern, sympathy, gratitude, anything but what happened next. Sarah exploded. "You weren't watching them." This is your fault, Elma. You let my child get hurt because you weren't paying attention. I was stunned. Sarah, are you serious? I was working. The boys were playing downstairs. It was an accident. I reacted immediately, took care of the wound, rushed him to the hospital. What more could I have done? My voice trembled with disbelief. An accident that wouldn't have happened if you were watching them properly, she said coldly. You're kidding me, right? You're never home. I've been taking care of your kids for months, feeding them, taking them to school, reading them bedtime stories, while you go out every night and come home drunk. I work hard to provide for my kids, she snapped, like a reflex, as if the phrase itself could shield her from criticism. That's a lie. You don't work. You go on dates, come back smelling like alcohol and men's cologne, and dump everything on me like I owe you something. The words burst out of me like a landslide, and there was no stopping them now. You're a terrible mother, Sarah. You don't care about Leon and Mateo. You're just looking for a free place to stay and someone to offload your kids onto while you sleep who knows where. And that's when she hit me. Fast, hard, across the face, open palm, with such fury it knocked the breath from my lungs. I stood there, holding my burning cheek, feeling a wave rise inside me, massive, final. Get out, I said quietly, not raising my voice. Get out of my house right now. I'm done. You can't throw us out. We have nowhere to go, she snapped defiantly. That's no longer my problem. You have until tomorrow. Or I'm calling the police. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. It was bitter, hoarse, almost unhinged. You won't call the police. Think about what that would do to the boys. She was right. And we both knew it. I looked toward the couch, where Leon and Mateo were sitting, pressed together, frightened and confused, not understanding what was happening, and my heart broke because they didn't deserve any of this. Fine. But you're leaving tomorrow. I mean it, Sarah. She just smirked and slowly, silently climbed the stairs, as if this wasn't a conflict, but just another round in a long game she still thought she was winning. The next morning, which happened to be a Saturday, I got up first, as usual, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and sat in the kitchen trying to gather my thoughts while the house was still asleep. Sarah came downstairs around 8, already fully dressed, makeup on, a bag over her shoulder, and some papers in her hands. Where are you going? I asked, barely glancing at her. Out. I'll be back later. She didn't say goodbye to me or to the boys, who were still peacefully asleep. I spent the morning cleaning the living room, finally gathering the last shards of the broken vase that were still tucked under the baseboard. I played with Leon and Mateo, pretended everything was fine, told them funny stories, made waffles, and tried not to think about what was coming next. Sarah returned around noon, and her face bore a strange, triumphant expression that made me tense up inside. Elma, we need to talk, she said, waving the papers in her hand as she walked toward me. What is that? I asked. Medical records from yesterday's hospital visit. I'm going to file a police report against you for child abuse. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. You're insane, I whispered. I'll tell them you deliberately threw the vase at Mateo's leg because you don't want us living here, she said, her voice cold and assured. No one will believe you. It was an accident, and that's obvious, I tried to speak calmly, though everything inside me was trembling. Sarah's smile widened, cruel, venomous, vile. I already spoke to the boys. I'll tell them what to say. They'll repeat whatever I tell them. Children are easy to manipulate, especially when they're scared. I slowly turned and saw Leon and Mateo standing in the doorway, listening to our conversation. Their faces were filled with confusion, fear, and helplessness, and in that moment, I realized Sarah was willing to lie to the police and destroy her sons' lives just to maintain control. You're sick, Sarah. You're willing to lie and traumatize your own children just so you can stay in my house. For what? Free food? My salary? My life, the one you're trying to steal? My voice trembled with fury, but I knew I had to finish saying it all. "I'll drop everything if you let us stay here and give me $50,000. Her voice was calm, almost casual, as if she were quoting the price of a car or discussing rent, not uttering words that could destroy our relationship as sisters forever. I stared at her, unable to comprehend what was happening, because in that moment, in that kitchen, bathed in the soft light of the morning sun, I no longer saw my sister, no longer saw a woman who had been through a divorce or a tired mother who was struggling. I saw a manipulator, shameless, conscienceless, willing to use anything, even her children's fear, to get what she wanted. My own sister was blackmailing me. "You're out of your mind if you think I'm giving you $50,000, I said evenly, though my hands were shaking with rage, and I gripped the edge of the table to keep from losing control. "Then I suppose I'll go ahead and file that police report," she said with a shrug, as if talking about a trip to the grocery store. I knew there was no point arguing with her right then, so, trying to keep whatever composure I had left, I said, "Fine. But first, I'm calling Mom and Dad. I want them to hear exactly what you're planning to do." "Go ahead," she replied indifferently. "They'll take my side. They always do." I didn't argue. I simply walked into the hallway, dialed my father's number, and invited them to dinner. No explanations, no details, just told them we all needed to talk. While we waited for them to arrive, I went upstairs to my office, sat at my desk, launched the home security system interface, and accessed the cloud storage, which held hundreds of hours of footage from hidden cameras throughout the house. I found exactly what I needed: footage from the living room the previous day. Everything was clear: the boys running and laughing, Mateo turning suddenly during play, not seeing the table, bumping into it, the vase wobbling, falling, hitting his leg, the boys screaming, Leon running over. An accident, undeniable, unambiguous, unmanipulated. I downloaded the video, then selected several other clips. Nighttime footage showing Sarah returning home clearly intoxicated, stumbling in the hallway, not noticing as she kicked off her shoes and left them in the middle of the floor, rummaging through the kitchen drawers for food, carrying men's jackets, reeking of someone else's cologne. I copied everything onto a USB drive, placed it in an envelope, and tucked it into a desk drawer. Then I went downstairs and began preparing dinner. Sarah, unaware of what I had done, still wandered the house with the smug look of someone who believed her blackmail had worked. My parents arrived around 5 in the evening, late and visibly irritated, not even bothering to hide it. Dad, the moment he stepped through the door, asked, "Elma, what is this about?" "We had plans tonight. We need to talk about Sarah's housing situation," I said calmly, motioning them toward the living room. Mom immediately slipped into her usual role as defender of the older daughter. "If you're trying to kick your sister out again, Elma, I just don't understand you. I'm very disappointed." "Please, just sit down," I said, pointing to a chair. Sarah was already on the couch, lounging like a queen on a throne, and her expression was completely serene, as if she already knew the entire scene would play out exactly as she intended. The boys were upstairs. I had asked them in advance to stay in their room. "Mom, Dad," I began, steadying myself, "Sarah blackmailed me." "What?" Mom raised her eyebrows, her face going pale. "She threatened to file a false police report, accusing me of child abuse, if I didn't give her $50,000 and let her stay here permanently." Sarah jumped up from the couch, shouting angrily, "She's lying. She hurt Mateo yesterday and now she's trying to cover it up by making me look insane. Sarah hit me in the face last night," I continued, looking straight at my father. "And she comes home drunk almost every night while I take care of her kids, feed them, help them with school, read them bedtime stories. I do everything, and she doesn't even ask how they're doing." Dad shook his head, his face caught somewhere between exhaustion and frustration. "Elma, you always dramatize everything. Sarah just needs time to recover. She's using me as a free babysitter while she runs around God knows where, and I'm tired of covering for her. Your sister is trying to rebuild her life after a difficult divorce," Mom said through tight lips. "You need to be more understanding." Sarah nodded, holding back a smirk. "Elma never understood me. She just can't stand sharing her perfect little space." "I'm not making anything up," I said calmly, walking over to my laptop. And I can prove it. I inserted the USB drive, opened the appropriate folder, and played the video. This is a recording from the living room security camera yesterday. We all stared at the screen. The footage began. The boys were running, laughing. Mateo collided with the table. The vase fell, a scream, blood. The room fell silent. It was obviously an accident. No hint of intent, no aggression, no negligence. Sarah's face went pale. "Elma, where did you get this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I have surveillance cameras installed throughout the house. They've been here since I moved in. This is my house, Sarah. You were spying on us." Her voice rose sharply. "I was protecting myself. And clearly, for good reason. The cameras caught your lie." I clicked to the next video. The footage showed the front hallway on the Tuesday Sarah had claimed she was working late. She stumbled through the front door past midnight, dropped her keys, bumped into the wall, and laughed, loud, stupid, unaware. "This was last Tuesday," I said. "You told me you were at work late." I didn't stop. I clicked again. Another video, this time from Friday at midnight, Sarah barely able to stand, in a cheap, flashy dress, surrounded by a cloud of cologne so strong it seemed to fill the hallway even before she closed the door. "And this is Friday. You said you were at a training." I didn't look at Sarah. I looked at our parents. My father's jaw dropped. My mother froze, like she had just been punched in the stomach and couldn't breathe. "Sarah?" Mom's voice was barely above a whisper, trembling. "Is this true? You lied about work?" Sarah's face twisted in panic. She started flailing her hands, as if trying to wave the images out of the air. "It's not what it looks like," she blurted. "I do work. I just, sometimes go out afterwards, to unwind. There's nothing wrong with that." "Nothing wrong?" I turned to her. "Leaving your kids with me every night while you get drunk? Threatening to blackmail me with false abuse claims?" My voice shook, but I spoke clearly. "I never said I'd file false charges," she shouted. "Yes, you did. You said you'd tell the police I threw the vase at Mateo, and that you'd coach Leon and Mateo to lie for you." Dad slowly stood, like every movement cost him energy, and looked at Sarah with an expression full of exhaustion and disbelief. "Sarah, did you really threaten to make false accusations against Elma?" he asked, as if still hoping to hear her deny it. But there was no answer, only silence and her trembling shoulders. "I was just trying to protect my kids," she finally muttered. "Protect them from what?" Mom asked quietly. "From their aunt, who's been taking better care of them than you ever have." Her voice was broken, her eyes red with unshed tears. Sarah lowered her head, as if their mother's words had finally struck something inside her. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I needed help. I needed time to figure things out." "To figure things out?" I echoed. "Figuring things out means going to therapy, getting a job, caring for your children, not drinking yourself senseless every night and turning your kids into weapons. That's not figuring things out, Sarah. That's selfishness." "Elma," Dad said, his voice hoarse, "what do you want us to do?" I looked at both of them, tired, bewildered, broken by what they'd just witnessed. "I want Sarah and the boys to leave my house tonight. And if she tries to file any false report, I'll take these videos to the police and file for custody of Leon and Mateo." Sarah gasped, as if I'd slapped her. "You can't take my kids from me," she cried. "Look at me, Sarah. I have hours of footage showing you stumbling home drunk while your kids are sleeping, and I have proof that you threatened me. Any judge would see those boys need a stable, safe home." "Elma, you can't be serious," Mom started. "I am completely serious," I said calmly. "Sarah is a bad mother. And I will no longer let her use me." Sarah began to cry, but her tears felt forced, rehearsed, like something out of a bad school play. "Please, Elma, forgive me. I'll change. I promise." I only shook my head. Too late. You had plenty of chances. And you only got worse. Elma, think about your nephews, Dad pleaded. Think about what's best for them. I am thinking about them, I replied firmly. They need a mother who actually cares, not a woman who treats them like a burden. I looked over at Sarah, still perched on the edge of the sofa, mascara streaked, lips trembling. You have 2 hours to pack and leave. If you're not out of my house by 8 o'clock, I'll call the police and show them everything. Mom and Dad exchanged a glance, then turned to Sarah. Maybe you should move in with us for a while, Mom offered gently. Until you can get your life together. I don't want to live with you, Sarah snapped. It's too cramped. Well, you're not staying here, Dad said firmly. Elma's right. This has gone too far. Sarah looked at us with hate and rage, but beneath it, I saw what mattered most, fear. She knew she had lost. Without saying another word, she got up and slowly climbed the stairs to pack. My parents left without saying goodbye, their shoulders slumped, their heads down. They were ashamed and uncomfortable, and I felt for them, but not enough to doubt my decision. Sarah and the boys left just before 7:30. Leon and Mateo hugged me tightly, like they didn't want to let go, and it tore me apart to watch them leave. But I knew this was the right thing to do. A few months later, I heard from a cousin that Sarah now worked full-time, because Mom and Dad had stopped picking up the boys from school, stopped making dinner, and no longer let her go out drinking. She actually had to take care of her children. The house became quiet again, not empty, just quiet. It was my quiet. I could focus on work again, eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, without adjusting to anyone else's schedule or whims. Sometimes I felt a pang of guilt for Leon and Mateo, especially on days when I found their old drawings forgotten in drawers, but I reminded myself each time, it wasn't my job to raise them. That was Sarah's responsibility. And maybe now that she's faced the consequences, she'll finally become the mother her children truly deserve. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think of this story, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you soon.